What's the best tent for motorcycle camping? It's a question I get asked all the time, and my answer is always the same. It depends. I'm Ben from MotoCamp Nerd, and I want to help you figure out what the best tent is for you and your style of camping and riding. So let's jump into it. I think the first question a lot of people ask is how many people, what size tent do you need? So usually you'll see tents rated at one, two, three, four, five, and up person tents. And it really depends on how you like to camp. So if you don't like to take any gear in your tent with you and you're trying to pack as minimally as possible, then I would look at the one person tent. Only because you can save a lot of extra materials and pole structures and anything else that will help reduce that pack size. But most people, I'd say 90% of people who are going motorcycle camping, do not enjoy a one person tent because the size is just too small. And you've got to be careful because some brands and their sizing for their tents are a little bit more narrow and they're made for a 20-inch pad versus those who use a 25-inch wide pad. It won't fit inside that tent. So, if you like to bring your boots or your helmet and maybe a small bag with you in the tent, a two-person tent is the way to go. It's going to be wide enough so that way you can put a wider pad, up to 30-inch plus pad inside the tent. And then, like I said, you can bring in your boots, a helmet, and maybe a small bag. Now, if it's you and a partner going camping and you're sleeping in the tent together, then at least a three-person tent because that will give you plenty of room again for the oversized pads that aren't not just the 20-inch ones, 25, 30-inch wide pads for each of you, or a big double wide pad. And then again, still room for a small bag, your helmet, your helmets, boots, and a little bit extra bring into the tent with you. Now, if you're somebody who's traveling solo, but you like to bring your riding gear, your helmet, all your bags and everything in the tent with you, then you may want to look into a three-person tent because that's going to give you a little bit more room to bring the gear in with you. I've had that question come up a lot when people are asking. A lot of people assume they just want a two-person tent, but then I've even realized when customers come in, they bring in a lot of gear into their tent, and it's just the way they do things. There's no right or wrong. It's just that's their style of bringing things into the tent with them that they like to do. And so we usually get them into a three-person tent instead just because of all the extra space they may need. So the next thing you want to figure out is the type of tent and the structure you want. There's freestanding, semi-freestanding, and a non-freestanding tent, also known as like a backpacker's trekker pole style tent. Now, freestanding tents are going to have a pole going to each corner of the tent, and those are mostly what people use because it's just easier. They can set it up, they can pick it up and move it around if they find a spot they don't like, or maybe it's a little unlevel. It just makes it easy to move around. A semi-freestanding tent is going to be like the fully freestanding tent, except you're going to have to stake out sections of the tent to get the full interior volume. Some of those tents would be like the Tiger Wall, the Fly Creek, or even like the Hornet backpacking tent. It uses a wishbone or a Y style pattern with a backbone, and then the two corners of the tent actually have to be staked out to get the full volume of the tent. Now, these tents are, again, easier to set up, but there's a few extra steps with staking it out to make sure you get all the volume. And what it does is it actually helps create a little bit less pack size and weight because you don't have all the poles you need for all corners. You're just using a Y pattern or whatever kind of pattern that tent may have. Now, the non-freestanding or the trekker pole style tents, those are going to be ones that you're going to have to stake it out all the way around, and then you're going to use some sort of either trekker pole or aluminum pole to pitch the tent. And these come in an array of sizes. It can be a pyramid style tent. They've got all the different types of backpacking tents out there now that are in different weird trapezoidal shapes and squares and rectangles. So some of them take one, some of them take two, some take even three different poles to erect that tent. Now the bonus here is you're reducing your pack size and your pack weight with less poles. The con is you're going to have to stake it out. And so keeping in mind with what type of tent you want, the terrain you're going to be in, where you're going to be camping, can you stake it out, or are you going to have to use rocks or trees or roots to actually attach to whenever you pull your tent out versus a traditional stake. Now moving on to a 3 or 4 season tent, Generally, I tell people they don't need a four-season tent unless you're really going into winter camping and high winds and possibly even snow. Some of these tents have skirts on them for the snow, they have a thicker outer wall, and they're made to really keep the warmth in. They do make a 3 to 4 season tent, kind of like a hunting or expedition style tent, and those tents, of course, are still they're made and structurally designed for high winds and poor weather conditions. Most people will use a 3 season tent. A 3 season tent is going to get you from early spring to late fall. I know several people who've gone camping in the winter time, depending on where you're at. Here in North Carolina, the winters can be kind of mild, so up through December into January, it may be down in the 30s, and people are fine with that because their sleep system is capable of doing that. Now, with a 3 season tent, it's going to give you a lot more airflow. It's going to be more of a mesh body, and that way you've got more airflow, and that's going to help, especially in the more humid areas, because that's going to help prevent all the condensation buildup inside the tent, which we'll get into more in a minute. Double wall versus single wall. Now we're getting into talking about humidity and moisture and condensation buildup. A double wall tent is going to be beneficial because it is 2 walls. You've got 2 pieces of fabric between you and the outside. Double wall tents are going to be better with condensation because you're going to get a little bit more airflow, and if there is condensation, it's going to stick to the outer layer, not the inner layer, and prevent all of it from dripping down into the bottom of the tent. Now, that's not always the case because if there's a lot of condensation buildup, it's eventually going to find its way down from the inner tent hanging from the outer layer. The moisture is going to find its way into the tent. So keep that in mind. A lot of humidity, you're still going to have a little bit of buildup of moisture on the inner tent as well as the outer layer, but it's going to be much better than a single wall tent. Single wall tent, all that moisture is going to cling to the outer wall, and it's just you and that wall. There's nothing in between it. So all that moisture is going to run down the walls and collect in the bottom and the body of the tent. Now, the pro to a single wall tent, like looking at Six Moon Designs, they've got their Lunar Solo, or even looking at tarps and tarp tents, is it's a lot less fabric. So those are going to pack smaller and lighter than typically like a dome style tent with a rain fly over the top of it, because you've got your inner tent and outer fly, which is just more material to pack up. So depending on where you're going, if you don't mind the extra moisture and humidity inside the tent, if it's something you can deal with, it's not a big deal. Keep in mind these kind of things whenever you're picking out which style of tent you're going to go with. Tent fabrics. We're going to cover the 2 common types, which is nylon and polyester. There is Dyneema that's out there, but it's on the higher end of the spectrum, and usually it's not seen. Unless you're really trying to pack super light, you may look into Dyneema, but most people aren't going to go into a Dyneema tent. It's going to be a polyester or a nylon style tent. Nylon's a little bit stronger than polyester for the weight, and so you can get a thinner material for the same strength, versus polyester has to be a thicker material to get that same strength as nylon. Now, the pro to polyester is it's a lot more water resistant than nylon. Both of them have some water retention to them, but polyester has a higher resistance to water, and it's not going to sag. So if you've ever been out camping in a field of tents after a rain and you've seen your buddy's tent starting to sag a little bit from all the rain, nylon collects moisture, and that's what causes that. So depending on if that's a pro or a con for you, look into those types of tents. Now, the pro to nylon is it's going to be a lot lighter and a lot smaller packing than a polyester style tent. So looking at bike packing tents and a polyester versus nylon version, the polyester comes in about 2 or 3 pounds heavier versus the nylon tent, which leads us into pack size. Are you looking for a tent that packs a certain size because you need it to pack small and really light on the bike? Or are you just looking for a tent and you don't really care how big it packs up on the bike because you've got plenty of room to spare? We ride 2 up a lot, and so for us, our requirement is we need a smaller packing tent because we don't have a lot of real estate on the bike. Somebody else who's on a bigger bike riding solo, if I was riding solo, I'd have the whole back seat. I could throw a tent over the back seat if I really wanted to. Now, what's going to affect the pack size is if you want to stand up in your tent. If you want a tent that's big enough to stand up in, it's going to be a lot more materials. The pole sets are going to be bigger. The poles are going to be thicker. It's going to be heavier. It's going to be a bigger packing tent in general. So keep that in mind. If you want to stand up in your tent, expect to pack a larger tent. And this is going to be about 22 inches long, probably about 10 inches wide, and about 14 pounds that I've seen for some of the smaller, lighter weight family style tents that give you enough headroom to stand up in. Whereas if you don't have that requirement to change in your tent while standing up, then get a regular backpacking tent. Those little dome tents, 1, 2, 3 person tents are going to be fine. So the last thing it's going to come down to is the features that you want in the tent and your budget. And I've put these two together because they kind of correlate based off of what features you want and the quality of the tent and the materials and your price point. So a tent that's got a lot of extra features to it, a lot higher end quality and materials to it is going to be on the higher end of the spectrum versus a tent that doesn't have all the extra bells and whistles is going to cost a lot less. And some of these features may be as simple as the type of vestibule, how many doors the tent has, what kind of footprint design it has, if the tent is square versus has a taper to the foot area, if there's a netting and a loft already built into it, or if that's an accessory piece. All these little things build up to the price point of the tent. Once you go through all of these filters, by the end, you're only going to have a few tents to select from, and those are going to be the tents that are going to work best for you and your style. Again, go work through this. It's kind of like a worksheet. Filter through everything on tents and think about different scenarios when you're out camping and when you're packing the bike, what's going to work best for you. If you ever have any questions on tents and camping gear and what gear works best for you and your style of camping, feel free to call us, email, reach out any way. We're happy to help. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you around the campfire.